Deep within the dense canopy of ancient trees and tangled undergrowth that spread across the island of Guadalcanal, there stood a monumental ridge that in 1942 became the setting for some of the most brutal and sweltering fighting of World War II. For the Japanese, the ridge was the final barrier between their troops and Henderson Field, a vital airbase that provided U.S. forces with air supremacy in the region. Capturing it was essential for their war efforts. At the summit of this ominous terrain, Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, known as Red Mike, volunteered to lead 800 Marines in a determined resistance against the advancing Imperial Japanese Army. These were seasoned warriors who would fight to the last man to seize control of the site. On the night of September 12, 1942, the jungle enveloped what remained of the daylight in an oppressive darkness that rendered the landscape hauntingly silent. The silence throbbed in the ears of the defending Marines, their hearts pounding as they gripped their rifles tightly. The calm was suddenly shattered by a thunderous barrage of artillery fire, unleashing a horrific wave of violence that would be remembered as one of the most savage assaults in U.S. military history. The battle's intensity left an enduring impression on the land, earning it the grim nickname Bloody Ridge. Yet this would not be its final legacy. The site would come to be known by a more honorable title, a tribute to the brave men who held their ground under Edson's command. Their valor changed the course of history, and the ridge became forever known as Edson's Ridge. As the summer of 1942 unfolded, the war in the Pacific reached the shores of Guadalcanal, a strategic outpost in the South Pacific. Both American and Japanese forces quickly recognized its importance in the broader conflict. The Japanese sought to secure the island to sever communication and supply lines between the United States and Australia. This move was part of a larger strategy aimed at consolidating control in the Pacific. For the United States and its allies, stopping Japanese expansion was critical. Guadalcanal represented a key point for launching future operations. Among its dense geography, one area stood out as especially significant: the Lunga Point airfield. The Japanese were in the process of constructing the airfield, which, once completed, would have allowed them to project air power throughout the Pacific and disrupt Allied operations. In response, on August 7, 1942, U.S. Marines launched Operation Watchtower, a bold mission to seize control of the airfield and blunt Japanese ambitions. Despite fierce resistance, the operation succeeded in capturing the unfinished airstrip. This victory gave the U.S. a powerful foothold from which to conduct air operations, striking a serious blow to Japanese forces. On August 12th, the airfield was renamed Henderson Field, honoring Marine aviator Lofton Henderson, who had died heroically at Midway. Aircraft operating from the airfield soon came to be known as the Cactus Air Force, reflecting the code name for Guadalcanal. The surprise Allied assault disrupted Japanese plans significantly. With control of the airfield, the United States gained air dominance over the Solomon Islands, placing immense pressure on Japanese forces. In response, General Alexander Vandegrift deployed the 1st Marine Division, 11,000 strong, to defend Henderson Field. Between August 21st and September 3rd, he repositioned 3 Marine battalions, including Lieutenant Colonel Edson's 1st Raider Battalion, to strengthen the defenses. The Japanese responded by calling upon the 17th Army based at Rabaul, under the command of Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake. With national pride at stake, Hyakutake was determined to recapture the airfield at any cost. The Allies' growing presence and their control of Henderson Field severely restricted Japan's ability to maintain dominance in the region, a reality the Japanese command failed to fully grasp in time. They launched a poorly prepared counteroffensive. On the night of August 21st, a frontal assault at Alligator Creek, near the eastern edge of the Lunga perimeter, resulted in the devastating Battle of the Tenaru. Of the 917 Japanese soldiers, only 128 survived and retreated to Taivu Point to await reinforcements. By August 23rd, General Kiyotake Kawaguchi and his troops arrived at Truk, preparing to move to Guadalcanal. Following the earlier destruction of a troop convoy, the Japanese altered their approach, ferrying soldiers to Rabaul and then using destroyers to reach the Shortland Islands. These ships, able to complete the journey in a single night, reduced the risk of Allied air attacks. However, this strategy forced the Japanese to transport heavy equipment separately in fast destroyer runs. They referred to this method as rat transportation. The Allies mockingly called it the Tokyo Express. Admiral Raizo Tanaka managed these operations, successfully landing troops and supplies under cover of darkness. The campaign quickly became a grinding war of attrition, focused on landing reinforcements and stopping enemy landings. The arrival of General Kawaguchi and his 35th Infantry threatened to overwhelm the Allied position. To counter the Japanese nighttime advances, Lieutenant Colonel Edson led his Marines in hit-and-run attacks on key positions around the island. Having already earned 2 Navy Crosses, Edson was recognized as a tactical genius. He soon made a pivotal decision that would influence the direction of the campaign. General Kawaguchi, aiming once more for the Lunga perimeter, set the date for his major assault, September 12th. Preparations began on September 5th as Kawaguchi's forces moved west from Taivu toward Lunga Point. By September 7th, he outlined his complex battle plan to the 17th Army, aiming to rout and annihilate American forces around the Guadalcanal airfield. His strategy involved dividing his troops into 3 groups. One would attack from the west, another, known as the Kuma Battalion, would strike from the east, and the main force of 3,000 men in 3 battalions, referred to as the center body, would launch a central assault from the south of the Lunga perimeter. He also requested air raids on Henderson Field to begin on September 9th, along with naval vessels to be positioned off Lunga Point by September 12th to intercept any American attempts to retreat. While the bulk of Kawaguchi's men advanced toward Lunga Point, approximately 250 soldiers remained behind to guard the brigade's supply base at Taivu. Meanwhile, native scouts informed by British sources reported Japanese activity near the village of Tasimboko at Taivu, located about 17 miles east of Lunga. Acting swiftly on this intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson led 813 Marines to launch a raid. They were split into 2 groups and transported by destroyers USS McKean and Manly, supported by 2 patrol boats. At 5:20 a.m. on September 8th, Edson and 501 of his men landed at Taivu. With air support from Henderson Field and backing from the destroyers, they fought their way into Tasimboko. By 11 a.m., the remainder of Edson's force arrived and reinforced the assault. Together, they broke through the village defenses, forcing the Japanese to retreat into the jungle. In Tasimboko, Edson's troops found a major Japanese supply base, complete with food, ammunition, medical supplies, and a vital shortwave radio. After securing documents and destroying the remaining supplies and equipment, they returned to the Lunga perimeter by 5:30 p.m. Among the captured documents was critical intelligence confirming that at least 3,000 Japanese troops were present on the island and preparing for an attack. Believing that an attack was imminent, Edson and Colonel Gerald Thomas speculated that the Japanese would target the undefended Lunga Ridge just south of Henderson Field because of its high ground and strategic vantage. Although General Vandegrift was skeptical and believed the coastal route posed a greater threat, Thomas managed to convince him to allow Edson's raiders to rest on the ridge, effectively reinforcing it. By September 11th, 840 of Edson's men were stationed there, unaware that they were about to face one of the most intense battles of the campaign. In the days before the assault, the Japanese launched probing attacks along the Lunga perimeter to test the Americans' strength. These skirmishes were easily repelled by the growing American forces, which pushed the Japanese back into the jungle to regroup. On the evening of September 11th, the roar of Japanese Mitsubishi G4M bombers filled the sky, dropping explosives on the American positions. Edson sensed that this was the prelude to a larger attack and warned his men to prepare. Despite their determination, the Marines were vastly outnumbered, with only about one defender for every 3 attackers. At midnight on September 12, 1942, the Battle of Bloody Ridge erupted. Darkness cloaked the battlefield as waves of Japanese soldiers charged forward, following a barrage of artillery fire. However, the Japanese offensive was disorganized. The first units attacked before the rest could synchronize, and the thick jungle terrain confused their movements, causing delays and compounding errors. These setbacks gave Edson the chance to rally his men and reinforce the ridge's defenses. As night deepened on September 12th, Edson stood atop a grenade box and addressed his exhausted Marines, urging them to endure just one more night. He believed that if they held out, they would be relieved by morning. As predicted, the Japanese struck with renewed ferocity. Their soldiers emerged from the jungle like phantoms, executing major attacks and dispatching small groups of infiltrators to penetrate the Marine lines. One infiltration forced Company B off a hilltop position, while another push drove the 1st Parachute Battalion back. Recognizing the threat of collapse, Edson ordered a tactical withdrawal to Hill 123 at the center of the ridge. The jungle, once a hindrance to the Japanese, now served as a shroud for their approach, making it difficult to spot them until they were dangerously close. At the height of the chaos, panic spread among the Marines as rumors circulated that the Japanese were using poison gas. Lacking gas masks, some soldiers feared the worst. Confused and frightened, a number of Marines fled toward the airfield, shouting "withdraw" and encouraging others to follow. Just as the lines were about to break, Major Kenneth D. Bailey and other officers arrived, rallying the Marines and forcing them back into defensive positions around Hill 123. Their presence calmed the troops and prevented a full collapse. Edson himself emerged from the command post, shouting encouragement and reminding his men of their strength and purpose. Inspired by his leadership, the Marines held their ground and formed a horseshoe-shaped defense around the hill. The Japanese launched repeated assaults, illuminated only by parachute flares dropped from a float plane overhead. Despite the relentless pressure, the Marines held firm. At one point, the Japanese attempted to deploy a 75mm regimental gun on Hill 80 to strike the American command post. Yet fate intervened when the gun's firing pin failed, robbing the Japanese of a potentially decisive advantage. Still, the attacks continued. Seizing a narrow window of opportunity, Edson led a bold charge to counter the Japanese pressure on the vulnerable left flank of the Lunga perimeter. He ordered parachute companies B and C to move forward from behind Hill 123 with bayonets fixed. The Para-Marines cut down Japanese soldiers who had broken through the Marine lines and appeared ready to collapse the American defense from the flank. They took up positions on the eastern side of the hill, strengthening the Marines' stand. At the same time, other Marines and members of Edson's command staff, including Major Bailey, moved through enemy fire to bring ammunition and grenades to the Marines around Hill 123, who were critically low on supplies. The sudden and forceful counterattack caught the Japanese by surprise and caused many to retreat. The Marines followed with a powerful artillery barrage, and the survivors were left to face hand-to-hand combat with determined American troops. As the fight continued, the Japanese launched another major assault on Edson's left flank, just after the parachutists had taken position. But the Marines held firm, using rifles, machine guns, mortars, and grenades to drive the enemy back. American artillery, including 105mm and 75mm guns, added to the destruction, tearing into the Japanese ranks. Marine Captain William J. McKinnon, who was present during the battle, described the continuous nature of the attack, comparing it to a relentless rain that paused only briefly before returning with even more force. By 4 a.m., after enduring waves of attacks that included close combat and sniper fire from every direction, Edson's men were reinforced by the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. Together, they beat back 2 more heavy Japanese assaults before daylight arrived. Throughout the long night, Colonel Edson stayed close to the front lines, only about 20 yards behind the firing line on Hill 123. Encouraging and directing his troops with steady resolve. Captain Tex Smith, who observed Edson during much of the battle, later said that Edson was the one who held the battalion together, remaining on his feet behind the front line while others stayed low to the ground. Despite the Marine defenses, parts of 3 Japanese companies managed to bypass the lines. 2 came from Tamura's battalion and 1 from Watanabe's. These groups made it as far as the edge of Fighter 1, a secondary airstrip at Henderson Field. 1 company was pushed back by a counterattack from Marine engineers, while the other 2, lacking reinforcements and reluctant to cross open ground, returned to their starting point south of the ridge at dawn. As daylight broke, about 100 Japanese soldiers remained visible on the southern slope of Hill 80, appearing ready for one final charge. But 3 U.S. Army P-400 Airacobra fighters from the 67th Fighter Squadron launched a low-level attack, cutting down most of the exposed troops. The survivors fled into the jungle. The battle became a defining moment in Marine Corps history, later known as the Battle of Edson's Ridge. At 1:05 a.m. on September 14th, General Kawaguchi ordered a retreat, leading his remaining men back into the jungle. There, they rested and treated their wounded for a day. Kawaguchi was then ordered to move west toward the Matanikau River Valley. The retreat was grueling. The soldiers were hungry and exhausted, having eaten the last of their rations the previous morning. Many discarded their weapons and equipment just to continue. Only half still had weapons when they reached Kokumbona to join another unit. Kawaguchi lost more than 850 men during the battle, and more died on the retreat. The Marines estimated they killed around 500 Japanese soldiers, while losing 80 of their own between September 12th and 14th. On September 17th, Vandegrift sent 2 companies from the 1st Battalion to pursue the retreating Japanese. They were ambushed by rear guard forces. 1 Marine platoon was lost in the attack, and only a few wounded survivors were ever found. Vandegrift denied a request to attempt a rescue. On September 20th, a patrol from Edson's battalion caught up with a retreating Japanese column and engaged them. As the Japanese regrouped, American forces focused on strengthening their defenses around Lunga. Vandegrift brought another battalion from Tulagi, and an Allied convoy delivered more than 4,000 reinforcements from a provisional Marine brigade. These additions allowed the Americans to build a stronger defensive line around the perimeter. The Japanese army had never suffered such a major defeat before Edson's Ridge. News of the loss caused a shift in strategy. Japanese leadership realized Guadalcanal could determine the outcome of the wider war. The battle shattered Japan's hopes of retaking Henderson Field, which allowed the United States to secure air superiority over the Solomon Islands and launch a powerful island-hopping campaign. As a result, General Hyakutake was forced to pull troops from New Guinea, just 30 miles from their objective of Port Moresby, to reinforce the Solomon Islands. This diversion proved costly. Japan never regained enough strength to continue its New Guinea offensive. The battle highlighted Guadalcanal's importance, and both sides escalated efforts to control the island. The Americans, with better defenses and more troops, made Henderson Field virtually unassailable. The battle marked the beginning of Japan's decline in the South Pacific and a shift in momentum to the Allies. It was a critical moment that signaled the weakening of Japanese power in the region. After the war, Red Mike Edson continued to serve his country. He was promoted to brigadier general in 1943 and later became chief of staff for the Fleet Marine Force, Pacific. He retired in 1947 with the rank of major general. In civilian life, he served as executive director of the National Rifle Association from 1948 to 1951. Edson passed away on August 14, 1955, at the age of 58. He received many honors for his leadership and bravery, including the Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, Silver Star, and 2 Legions of Merit. Yet, his most lasting legacy is that the ridge where he led his men in one of history's most heroic stands will always bear the name Edson's Ridge.